guys are fans of the Beatles or have a favorite song by the Beatles? Okay. Today I will be highlighting for you a brief history of the Beatles and key events which made them the music icons they are today. I'm sure all of you know who the Beatles are. Since the story of the Beatles is not widely known, I will be guiding us through their journey as a band. I will be discussing the band's development, their rise to fame, and the tragic end of the band. Okay, the band we know as the Beatles today, they were started by John Lennon and Paul McCartney, along with Stu Sutcliffe, which this is Stu Sutcliffe, and they started contemplating on forming a band in 1957, and in 1957 in Britain, you kind of have the end of the war and the end of a draft, so you really have all these youths not getting drafted, and they really start forming gangs, and they kind of divide themselves between mods and the rockers, and the mods they label themselves as modernists, and the rockers are actually, he was a rocker, this is kind of what they kind of dressed like, and they really hated each other. And so they started playing in small clubs in Liverpool, such as the Jacaranda Club and the Casbah Club. Early members included John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Pete Best for the drums, and Stu Sutcliffe for bass. And they started playing in Hamburg, Germany, back and forth. And Hamburg was really the place where bands really got big during this time and age. And in 1962, this is when they had a lot of changes to their band, and they got the members who we know of today. And Stu Sutcliffe was involved in a fight and suffered a blow to the head, and afterwards, for like several months, he suffered many headaches, and he eventually died from a cerebral hemorrhage. And he's actually considered the fifth Beatle, because if he wouldn't have died, then he probably would have still been in the band. And drummer Pete Best was replaced by Ringo Starr, who was in a band called Rory and the Hurricanes. And they get George Harrison to replace Stu Sutcliffe. And the Beatles, their major influences were the American rockabilly, the rockabilly era. So John Lennon, he says in an interview that one of his big major influences was Elvis Presley, and they really look up to the main stars of the rockabilly age, like Carl Perkins, the Everly Brothers. By 1963 is when they really start getting attention. According to David Saxmery, author of Rockin' in Time, they sold 11 million records and $18 million worth of goods, with singles such as I Wanna Hold Your Hand and She Loves You. And by 1964, the Beatles head to the U.S., which is what we consider today as the British invasion. Here's a picture of the Beatles by 1964. This is the original band that we know them as. They arrived in New York City on February 1964, and they were welcomed by screaming fans on the rooftops of the airport. And this really surprised them, because they didn't know if they were going to be that big in the United States. Because they were really criticized, because people always said, oh, yeah, they're big in Britain, but why would they be big here? And so they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show 2 days after they arrived. And the Ed Sullivan Show is a show where people really, if you're big, then you'll be on the show. It's a big compliment to be asked to be on the show. And when they were on there, it was viewed by 75 million people, and that accounted for 60% of all TV owners nationwide in America. According to Bob Spitz, the author of the Beatles, the biography, they toured back and forth between the States and Britain, racking in a total of $56 million. They recorded 13 albums within a period of 7 years, and this the American public, they really try to counter back, and there was a band actually formed just to imitate the Beatles, but for America, and they were called the Monkees. And a little trivia was Charles Manson, that mass murderer, he actually auditioned for the Monkees, but he didn't get in. In April 4th, 1964, the Beatles held 12 positions on the Billboard's Top 100 just in that week. So in 1 week, they had 12 positions on the Billboard. And certain key events that led up to their final tour was there was an interview where John Lennon mentioned that the Beatles were actually more popular than Jesus, and that created a lot of animosity towards the band. And towards the end, 2 key albums that they released that really reflected their talent as far as their range of their talent. One was the release of Revolver, and that included the hit song Eleanor Rigby, and Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club, which included Strawberry Fields, and in a 2000 issue of Rolling Stone, they ranked that as the #1 greatest album of all time. And I have the covers. This is the cover of their album Revolver, and this is the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club. And this kind of really reflected their music, because their music for this album really was, they explored a more psychedelic genre, which was kind of popular during that time. And then the death of, towards the end of their tour, their final tour, one of their manager, Brian Epstein, dies. It's ruled as an accidental overdose, but the media, they kind of speculated as suicide, and John Lennon quotes of his death that it was really the beginning to their end of the band. And then Let It Be was their final album, although it was recorded before their Abbey Road album, which their Abbey Road album was the one that they kind of had a lot of conflict on with Paul and John. So they decided to split up because they didn't really agree on a lot of aspects of that album, and they didn't agree on the financial advisors that they wanted. I've just gone over with you the history of the Beatles, from how they were and how they were formed and their unfortunate end. Even though the Beatles are no longer a band, they continue to leave their imprint on music today.
All right, Gabriella, what did you think?
With your thesis, when you were talking about the Beatles, and your preview was clear, you had the development, fame, and the ending of the band, and in your speech you do go over that. I think for people who don't really know the history of the Beatles, you did bring up some interesting stuff that people wouldn't know about, especially like the band members previous to Ringo and George. I think maybe a bit more on the 4 guys that we know specifically, how like John and Paul knew each other, how they got George in particular, and Ringo came in. But I did like what you did have. You were clear, and you did cover each part that you said that you're going to cover. So, and you wrapped it up.
Okay. The subject, I think, is fine. You've got a very general statement about what you're going to accomplish, but it's clearly identified. You lay out the structure clearly. Internally, I didn't think you did the signposting as clearly as you needed to, and it just seemed like you were going through a narrative at this point instead of really structuring an idea and building it into a speech. It just is a string of incidents that are related in the story, but not illustrating a particular point. And I think that you came closest in the beginning to doing that with the issue of how the band identified with the different groups and how the original members switched over, and then also right on the brink of making it big in the U.S. I think you've got a potential, here's a key point that we should be talking about and focusing on, and then after that it just sort of meanders through the rest of the story, and I don't think that you get as much out of it as you could. The images are okay, they're large enough to see, they don't really add much to the presentation, they're primarily organizational in nature. I think you need a little bit more energy in the presentation. The Beatles are, they're usually seen as being kind of a up kind of subject, and there's enthusiasm here. You saw that most people know the music and are familiar with it, so it seems a little odd that it seems sort of dry when you're talking. You need to, talk to us instead of reading through the material. Just tell us what you think, how you feel about it. The material is there to help you give the speech. It's not the speech itself. All right, thank you.